Welcome to Figments of Digital Imagination, Episode 5, Winning the AI Arms Race. I'm your host, Dan Leaf, call sign Fig. Today we're going to talk about how we have to go on the offensive and continue to develop more sophisticated, more capable AI tools rather than simply trying to block adversary access to our most advanced chips. But first, a word from the new sponsor for Figments of Digital Imagination, Vernetics. Vernetics provides remarkable next-generation cyber capabilities. Visit Vernetics.com for more information. I recently read an article in the Financial Times where the author, an official from the last administration, suggested that what is needed is a total ban on chip sales to China. That hasn't worked, and it won't work, and chips aren't the problem. Please watch this video, thanks to Google Gemini Notebook LM for helping me put it together, that'll explain in more detail, and I'll talk to you a bit afterwards.
To maintain a strategic advantage in artificial intelligence, the United States government implemented a straightforward strategy: block access to the hardware that makes AI possible. These export controls specifically targeted advanced graphics processing units, the physical semiconductors that provide the massive processing power required to train modern neural networks. Despite these embargoes, Chinese development labs have recently released powerful open-weight AI models, like DeepSeek, that perform on par with Western systems, while costing a fraction of the price to train. The rapid advancement of these models poses an immediate national security concern, as the People's Liberation Army actively researches how to integrate these high-level AI capabilities into their defense networks and military applications. A border wall built to stop shipping containers struggles to contain an asset that exists purely as data and code. Without physical access to the chips, Chinese companies bypass the bans through a cloud computing loophole. They simply rent computing time on restricted American processors, housed in offshore data centers located in third-party countries like Japan or Malaysia. Another evasion tactic is model distillation. Chinese labs purchase API access to leading American AI platforms, using the outputs to train smaller models. This extracts top-tier capabilities without needing massive data centers of banned chips to train models from the ground up. And when physical hardware is absolutely necessary, illicit supply chains have successfully routed billions of dollars in restricted processors into China by smuggling them through non-aligned countries. The success of these three evasion paths made it obvious to lawmakers that regulating physical hardware shipments at the border was no longer enough. Congress responded with a barrage of new legislative proposals, shifting their regulatory focus away from policing physical objects toward monitoring digital access. The Remote Access Security Act attempts to close the data center loophole by legally defining the offshore rental of cloud computing power as a controlled export subject to the same strict bans. To address data scraping, the Deterring American AI Model Theft Act authorizes direct financial sanctions against any foreign lab caught using distillation to extract data from a U.S. model. Meanwhile, the Stop Stealing Our Chips Act incentivizes whistleblowers to expose smuggling rings, and the Match Act attempts to restrict the export of the actual manufacturing equipment required to build the chips in the first place. Passing a new law to counter every newly discovered technical loophole creates an exhausting cycle, where regulators are constantly reacting to evasion tactics that have already served their purpose. Expanding these restrictions across every facet of the supply chain risks cutting U.S. technology companies off from a Chinese market that traditionally accounts for roughly 25% of all global AI chip consumption. When early versions of these export restrictions went into effect, leading American semiconductor manufacturers absorbed billions of dollars in immediate financial damage. This creates an innovation boomerang. American chip designers rely on massive global sales volumes to fund the intense research and development required to stay ahead. Strangling their revenue limits their ability to innovate. Simultaneously, being locked out forced Beijing to construct a completely independent, sanction-proof semiconductor supply chain, pouring state funding into domestic giants like Huawei. This table details the performance specifications of NVIDIA GPUs compared to China's domestically produced AI semiconductors. Looking at the compute performance row, Huawei's new Ascend 910C processor is steadily closing the gap with older generation NVIDIA hardware. Enforcing total economic isolation yields a paradox where U.S. attempts to starve a foreign AI industry end up draining the capital required to sustain America's own technological dominance. Relying solely on defensive trade embargoes strains diplomatic ties and exhausts domestic industries, pushing policy experts to identify security measures that don't depend entirely on border control. One engineering solution is verification by design. This embeds GPS-like location tracking directly into the silicon architecture of advanced processors. If a smuggled chip detects it left an approved geographic zone, the hardware automatically shuts down, rendering it entirely useless. A second alternative is multilateral alignment. Rather than issuing unilateral bans, the United States synchronizes its technology export diplomacy with key manufacturing allies to establish a unified global regulatory standard. Finally, the U.S. can shift focus inward to strengthen the American AI stack, aggressively funding the domestic power grid, data center infrastructure, and engineering talent for next-generation computing. A competitive lead cannot be preserved entirely through defensive regulation. Securing the future of artificial intelligence requires investing the capital and infrastructure needed to simply run faster than the competition.
So as you can see, the chips aren't the problem, and the chips can't be stopped. We need to have the best cyber and AI capabilities in the world by pursuing them, by energizing and enabling industry, by ensuring access to the enough power to generate new products, and we can't build a cyber border wall. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe and click like if you liked. And remember to visit Vernetics.com to see their next generation cyber capabilities. I'll see you next time on Figments of Digital Imagination.